So let me just rewind a second. Okay, so as Dirk kindly said, I'm Ben Poor. I work for Global Radio Creative Technologies along with Andy and Pete, who are around the corner. We're part of the UK's largest commercial broadcaster. We try and do innovative things for global radio, as well as working with our industry partners in the UK and across the world to ensure there's still a place for radio in our ever-changing world, so we don't fall behind with technologies. I'm here to talk to you about the experiences we've had recently in the UK radio industry with a collaborative project some of you may be familiar with, and I know it's been mentioned quite a few times already, although in German, so I wasn't quite sure of the context of it, called UK-Radioplayer. Not so much the specifics of the project itself, but more on the collaborative nature of it. And then going on to discuss another collaborative project, RadioDNS, which again Andy touched upon in the last presentation. So, UK-Radioplayer. The original purpose of this project was to provide a common platform for listeners to listen to stations on their desktop machine. But what were the motivations for this? Why did we do this? So, you can see a few screenshots there of the horrible online players used to have. They're quite historic, although not that historic in some cases. Some of the UK's larger radio stations are represented there, so you'll see a couple of global radio ones at the top, BBC and a few other commercial broadcasters. So all of these were launched from somewhere on the station website, and somewhere is probably the key word here, and all provide a different take on what the listener will see. So what was actually wrong with this? What was the problem? Well, every online player was distinct. They had different controls, different layout, so the user interface was something of a learning exercise to the listener. Another issue was that different broadcasters used different codecs. Listeners sometimes had to go through a process of checking what was supported on the machine, all of which was a bit of a chore. Telling a listener they couldn't listen to your station for whatever reason was one good way of losing a listener. And why should a listener have multiple codecs on their machine that they don't need for any other purposes? So how did this come about? Well, it was largely a function of the history of online players. Oops, sorry, skipping ahead there. Where's my pointer? There we go. So it's largely a function of history of online players, with different broadcasters having different ideas about what it should be for, heading in different directions, different strategic objectives. So let's go through a short history of online players in the UK, rewind a little bit. So in 1995, the BBC became the first major broadcaster, certainly in the UK, to start experimenting with online content. 1996, Virgin Radio, who are now called Absolute Radio, were the first to do 24/7 online broadcasting, which is very innovative in those days. Again, in 1999, Virgin Radio, the first to provide online now playing information, which is still a challenge for some people today, I know very well. 2002, the BBC Radio Player. So they seeked to standardise their own services underneath their own portal. And 2 years later, they started to provide podcasts. Again, the first UK broadcaster to provide podcasts. In 2006, the radio industry decided that maybe it wasn't a good idea to have all these different players around, so they had their first attempt at providing an online or unified player. And unfortunately, that didn't actually go anywhere, and the project was ditched due to various reasons. I think most people say that the reason that happened was because it wasn't ambitious enough, it didn't try and do enough. So, eventually a project was formed in 2009 to see if there was a way in which all the online players could be brought closer together to provide a standard interface. And there you see a few of the initial partners. They're a mix of public and commercial broadcasters and industry bodies. They've started the UK-Radioplayer project, which formed a not-for-profit company, limited company, called UK-Radioplayer Limited. So this took 2 years to release their first version in 2011. So here we are now. Nice effects. Some of the players that we have. It's a bit of a leap forward, as you can see. You may recognise some of the stations there. You can see the commonality, that's the important thing, the commonality between the interfaces. You have a common user interface layout, the controls are at the top, the custom web view is at the bottom. Now when I say custom web view, what I mean is that the only real thing that UK-Radioplayer defines is the controls at the top. So the stop button, the little navigation, the preset button underneath, and the volume controls. The whole bit underneath, which is a set size, is actually defined by the radio station. So you can see here that different radio stations have chosen to do different things. For instance, my own company, Capital FM there, they choose to show visual slides at the top and have some advertising down the bottom, so you can actually sell that commercially. The BBC can't quite see it there. They trail extra shows and podcasts on their shows, for instance. Other stations don't show much at all, but it's up to them what they show. So it's a common size as well, and it also gives you the ability to integrate searching and navigation between stations easily. So you can see, again, in the common controls in the top right-hand side, there's a search box. And that search box isn't about searching just for things inside that station, it's for searching for things across the whole of the stations that are in Radio Player. So the idea is that you can find any content you like across any stations. So it's a slightly weird concept for some stations to think, well, why should I drive people to other stations? But I'll explain that in a bit more time. So searching in presets. It's a key function, I think, and benefit of UK Radio Player. It's where the added value of UK Radio Player exists, and it's why we have the metadata platform, which I'll talk about in just a second. It's a common player that lets the listener find the radio content they want across all stations. So the key here is that the broadcaster sends regular program and event information to a central collator that UK Radio Player runs. It ingests and indexes that data, and then makes that available to each interface. Any service information is pre-provisioned, so that doesn't need to be sent. The search results are centrally run, so there's like a web service that UK Radio Player runs. The interface speaks back to that to retrieve search results. So I think I can show you a short demo if I've got any Wi-Fi. And I can find a popular musical act. I usually do Rihanna because it comes up with one of our stations. So let me just drag that over and try and navigate in that way. So here's Capital FM in London, which I'm assured is London's #1 hit music station. So if we click on the listen button at the top, you'll see that it pops up the UK Radio Player console.
I say the same thing twice, I'm awkward when I
say... It's a short advert, which we'll skip.
You get more for less than you'd think.
So here's Capital FM's UK Radio Player console.
Selected vehicles only.
Say I feel like I want to listen to Rihanna, for instance. Let me type in Rihanna here.
95.8.
I will then go out and search all the UK Radio Player metadata to see where the keyword Rihanna comes from. Somewhat disappointingly, one of my stations is at the top, but that happens. So the idea is that it prioritizes live content. So if one of the stations indicates that it's playing a Rihanna at any one time, that will appear at the top of the search results. If we go into Choice FM, for instance, one of the show descriptions of a show that was broadcast 16 hours ago, because it handles on-demand content as well, had Rihanna in its synopsis. So it thinks, well, that piece of content is applicable to the listener. So it'll point you towards there. Okay, so we'll go right to Josh. Just bear with me. Okay, so that's a short demo anyway. So the search algorithm, again, will focus on the relevant content happening right now. It can also pick up simple location keywords to try and find more locally appropriate content. So for instance, if I put in Rihanna Berlin, for instance, if such a thing existed, it would prioritize local stations, so it knows where stations are. That's all part of the service pre-provisioning. The idea is that, of course, local radio may be more important to listeners. You're trying to drive them towards local listening. The key thing is that listeners taken to the station playing things they want to hear, and it could aid in discovering new stations. So if you're a broadcaster, for instance, your benefit in being on such a sort of collaborative system is that you can get new listeners. So that's a short view of the sort of central collator. So there's the mantra that maybe some people hear quite often. I put a trademark in because I want to make my millions. It's agree on technology, compete on content, and it's a very useful way of summarizing the whole collaborative ecosystem that radio needs to partake in. Because if we put most of our energy into competing on technology, we confuse and fragment our listeners. Only if we agree on the technology base and compete on the actual content can we benefit the listeners and grow total radio listening. And radio is about content. We shouldn't really be fighting on the technology base. We should be creating brand new things for our listeners. We should highlight the value of the radio proposition and what can be built around the relationships between your radio station and its listeners. So agreeing on ways to work together with this new technology benefits the entire radio industry and keeps radio relevant to our listeners. And that's very important when we compare it to other online listening, other jukebox type things like iTunes and Spotify and all that sort of stuff. So here's some things I didn't click. So, good question. What took us so long? It took 2 years to develop the system, make it live from 2009 to 2011. Well, collaborating takes time. It's partly technical, mostly non-technical. But essentially what was being done had not been done in that form before, anywhere in the world, to the best of my knowledge. In terms of the technical, much work had to be done to rework partner implementations and accommodating different browsers. The metadata standards that each partner would transmit their data in also needed to be defined. That was a long process that I was involved in. We decided that one of the best places to start was the ETSI standard for DAB EPG, which is DAB EPG XML, if you want to use all the acronyms. There are a number of good reasons for starting from a known quantity. It had some good tools around producing it, people knew how to use it, and frankly it was a pretty good and simple specification for describing scheduled data and service information for radio. It had some challenges, but I'll probably mention that a bit later on. Building and tuning the search engine was also a complex task. I kind of liken it to a bit like all websites getting together and working out how Google algorithms should work. Obviously people want it to work in different ways that benefit them, so a way had to be found to ensure that the search algorithm was fair and equal and equitable to all broadcasters in terms of technology. However, the idea was always there and should always be there that broadcasters are rewarded for the accuracy, timeliness and depth of their metadata. So that's the competing on content part. We agree on the format, but we all compete on what we send and the accuracy. So obviously, finally, most importantly, we had extensive user testing because there's no point producing a system that listeners don't want or don't like. So where are we now? UKRP launched in 2011, as I said, with 157 stations. We're currently running with 353 live stations. There's also a large range of on-demand content that people can use. So this has helped drive a 43% increase year on year for internet radio listening in the UK, which is a massive increase. Our listeners want to be able to listen to our stations in different ways, and this has to be one way to enable them to do that. It's not the only way, but it's one way. So, we've seen how it works with desktop browsers. What about other platforms? Obviously, people use other platforms these days. The UKRP project has also released mobile apps using the same concept to provide a single player for all participating stations. This means that stations needing a simple mobile player need not create their own. And any existing data they supply is already deployed and ready for mobile listening. So once you're on UKRP, you're available on mobile apps as well. The important thing is it doesn't stop broadcasters creating their own enhanced mobile apps, and a lot of broadcasters still do, including most of the original UKRP partners and my own company, Global Radio. So I'd like to show you now a short video on a prototype tabletop device created for UK-Radioplayer project. Some of you may have seen before, but I just thought I'd show it. This implemented some user interface concepts that we're going to be seeing a lot more in the future, and big thanks to Mike Hill at UKRP for making this. I just flick over to VLC quickly. Hopefully it won't start playing Emerson, Lake and Palmer.
Now, on most digital radios, you have to choose your platform before you can start listening. Okay.
Just turn off capture first. Right, let me rewind that.
Hybrid digital radio. Now, on most digital radios, you have to choose your platform before you can start listening, FM or DAB or internet. On this one, the radio does all the hard work for you. Here we are listening to Steve Wright, Children in Need on BBC Radio 2 on a nice strong FM signal in London. If I start to interact with the radio and start to scroll the station list, I can see program information coming in for all the shows here. If I choose a station that's not in London, XFM Manchester, it tries the FM signal, obviously doesn't find it, and then pulls the station in over the internet. To the right there, it pulls in the station information automatically. If I scroll down the list to a station I know is on FM in London, Absolute Radio. Here we are with a nice strong FM signal, and it pulls in automatically those nice big slideshow visuals over the internet. Now, because we're on a connected radio, we can do a search. In the search box here, we can also scroll the station list. Nice big logos for each of the stations. Choose 6 Music, straight into the online stream. The digital radio station not on FM in London pulls in the station information. Now there's one more thing I want to show you here. If I scroll down to the bottom of this station list, you'll see there's a preset It's not a station, it's a program. It says Archers. Now, that will always give me the latest version of that program, in this case the Archers. There we are, the Archers SIG tune kicks in. Now, imagine I was in the kitchen cooking my tea, listening to Radio Caroline, and I didn't want to make my radio all dirty. I can actually use voice control with this radio to start the Archers. Radio, Archers. There we go, radio goes off, recognises my command, finds the latest edition of the Archers and starts to play it. So that's our prototype hybrid digital radio.
Okay, sorry about the screensaver then. So thanks to Mike for that and the use of his lovely hands. So you can see there that the most interesting thing for me is not the hardware really, but it demonstrates how a common technology platform allows us to do some interesting and non-traditional things. On the concept device, the navigation was absolutely centered around stations rather than the bearer. So the listener didn't need to worry about whether the station was available over IP or FM or IP. The device also performs service following, switching between FM and IP listening depending on reception strength. That's very much similar to the device that was shown in the last session. So UK-Radioplayer is one way that UK broadcasters have been collaborating, and it may be specific to the UK. The same concept has been adopted in some other countries, but the exact same model isn't always applicable elsewhere. So what else is available? So as was mentioned previously, another collaborative project I've been involved in is RadioPG, which is a standard for service and program information, and I'm the application team leader. There's an open group for discussion and development of the specification that anyone can see and submit feedback. No changes are made without a period of review by the group, and it's only proceeded on when there is a lack of sustained objection. This way, a chance for all opinions is given. Whilst this is currently guided under the auspices of the RadioDNS project, it has also recently been agreed by the World DNB Hybrid Radio Task Force that it be recommended as a superset ETSI specification for EPG over all radio platforms. So it could be used in many different places in future. This follows on from a collaboration between RadioPG and IMDA, or the Internet Media Device Alliance, that merged some additional functionality from IMDA into the RadioPG specification to form the basis of the combined hybrid radio EPG specification. So you can see that different organisations are pulling together to agree on a common technology platform for the whole world to use. So some of the experiences of working on UK-Radioplayer have helped inform the work which then happened with RadioPG. Both specifications started from the same base, which is the ETSI DAB EPG specification. And while they're all largely the same in terms of their data types, there are some important differences in the document structures and defined behaviours. For example, a short contrast here, UKRP is a centrally collated system. It enables the broadcaster to specify a web view for desktop listening and specific IP streams for mobile listening. UKRP also provides search functionality to broadcaster players and its own mobile apps. RadioPG is slightly different, has no central point of ingestion, because RadioDNS is supposed to be run as a very, very light organisation, doesn't really provide much rather than the initial lookup. The broadcaster may make their service and program information available to all to form a public API via some XML documents. The information also covers multiple bearers, so as mentioned before, IP, FM, DAB, DAB+, HD radio, another format, with more bearers to be added in the future, hopefully DVB if we work out a way to do that. As one of the most interesting things for me, certainly recently, and it's interesting how the focus shifts, is that linking out to data has become very important from the RadioPG. So traditional document formats usually linked just out to the home page of the station, should we say. But I think RadioPG will be more used as a jumping point for linking out to different specifications. So radio interactive, RSS feeds, external identities and aggregators like TuneIn, for example, is one aggregator that you could possibly link out to, or UK-Radioplayer indeed. So let's just have a quick look to see how the data flows within RadioPG. The broadcaster or a provider working on their behalf will make available the radio EPG information for anyone to ingest. So there's no central collator point. It's the broadcaster remaining in control of their own data. It could be an aggregator who then make this data available to their own apps. That's up to them. Devices can use the information directly, so tabletop radios, mobile devices, connected TVs, in-car entertainment systems, or just people doing cool stuff, which I obviously struggled to find some pictures for. Collaboration on Radio PG isn't just a thing that happens between broadcasters. We work together with the aggregators, with the device manufacturers, and the wider community. So they're all part of the ecosystem, and they are all equally important to us. So we talked a bit about the history of UK-Radioplayer, why collaborative approaches really helps us. Mentioned Radio PG, other cross-industry collaborations, but I'd like to leave you with some important things that I think I've certainly learned over the course of these projects. Open collaboration is a good thing, generally, and that also means working with third-party service aggregators and service providers. The thing that has to be kept in mind is be where your listeners are. Having open platforms, APIs, publishing your schedules in a common format all help. If you open up your data, you may find yourself appearing in places you didn't expect. Having that open data in a common agreed format helps that happen quicker and more widely. Secondly, always be in control of your own metadata. A third party, in a worst case, may choose to promote your competitors in your place, or sell advertising around your content, or alter your brand in some way, over which you have little control. They may seem contradictory, but they're really not. In fact, collaboration on defining open platforms can help to set some ground rules on acceptable usage. For example, one of the things we imported from IMDA to Radio PG was the ability for a broadcaster to set terms and conditions on metadata. While this doesn't prevent misuse of data, it does at least set out expectations, and working as part of a larger group gives you more influence to actually change that. So, thanks for listening. As mentioned before, we're around most of the day. We're here to help you get involved with Radio PG, give you some advice, how to set up things. Thank you for listening.
Ben Poor, Global Radio. Ben, we have to point out, because we all ask ourselves, how could we find a way to form a German radio player? It seems to be a little bit easier in the UK because the number of members for this collaborative project is a little lower than in Germany, isn't it?
Yes, I guess the number of broadcasters, the larger broadcasters, is lower than Germany, so there's less people to talk to, I guess, or argue with. So that helps, but I don't think it precludes. I think it just takes an open mind to want to work together. I know that the Radio Interactive project is one example of people working together, and all these technologies are complementary. It's just getting the reasons to work together and getting those conversations going that make these things happen, really.
What were to whom were you talking? To the CEOs, to the technical guys, to the program directors? What were the first contact you had into the other stations? To the sales guys, whatever? Well,
I think it started probably at the CEO levels, or maybe slightly below. People like Nick Piggott, my boss. We have organisations in the UK, for instance, the Radio Centre, which looks after commercial radio. We have the BBC, a large public broadcaster. There was a desire to work together, so I think the CEOs took it upon themselves to really drive this through, and then that then filtered down to the rest of the organisation.
What are the first obstacles you have to remove? Like, if we do it with you together, there's a competition between us, so it's hard for us to cooperate, or wasn't it the problem?
I don't think it was really a problem, really. I mean, obviously, the whole concept of station discovery, moving between stations, is an interesting one to sell to people. But I think as long as it's non-discriminatory, as long as it's open, it's transparent how it works, then different stations can work to getting their own content out there, their own metadata. And really, if you lose one listener for one reason, you might get 10 back for another reason. It just relies on you actually having good content out there to really draw them in. And that applies to the audio content in your radio as well as the metadata and digital side of things.
Just to ask for the future, what's on the roadmap? What are you doing next?
Well, I talked a little bit about further standardization. So it's obviously in the radio industry's interest to have less different ways of doing the same thing. A small number of simple ways of doing things. So that brings in the conversations that I've been having with IMDA. It brings in the work that we've been doing with XC for global standardization of the Radio PG standard. Again, working with other people to link up the different specifications, because this isn't just one thing to rule them all. It's just a place to start a journey of discovering content and metadata.
You told about the way for getting here. How long was it indeed?
So how many get to this stage here?
Yes.
I think I've probably been working on something in this form for at least the last 10 years. It starts at a point where you need to make sure, as a broadcaster, you need to make sure you've got your metadata, then finding compromise points that you can have with other partners in the radio industry to see where you can share that and compete on content.
Especially concerning the UK-Radioplayer, are there free developers working on this standard or on these applications, or do you have a group formed out of the other stations who are contributing for this, or how does it work?
Yeah, it's a not-for-profit company, and I believe the way it's arranged that there's a number of partners that formed it in the first place, and they're the ones that the technical discussions are involved in. So it's not as open maybe as the RadioDNS group of things. It's more of a closed set of technologies. But I think as long as you're an Ofcom licensed company, for instance, you can, in the UK, that's our regulatory body, you can participate in the UK-Radioplayer project and have your station out there.
Okay. Any questions to Ben? Yeah, one question.
Radio Player, they announced to the people on Radio Player that it's going to have quite a significant update in the next few months or so.
Version 3, I think, isn't it?
Can you just let us know some of the extra features and stuff that's coming out?
To be honest with you, I don't know the extra features. I'm not necessarily involved in the front-end control stuff. I generally do all the back-end stuff. But I think watch this space. You're involved in that, aren't you, I suspect?
We're keen. We had that
Yeah, I did a copy and paste on that this morning.
Looking a bit into the future, like I read of the TAL thingy for smart TVs coming from the BBC. So an open television application layer, TAL, which has a nice dog as its icon. But when is UK-Radioplayer coming to televisions, and how is UK-Radioplayer coming to televisions?
It's another platform. I would imagine. I think that they're certainly interested in getting on connected TVs, but the whole world of getting things working on a range of connected TVs is quite difficult. We've dabbled with putting radio services on there before, but it's the actual support between different TVs is quite varied. So I guess that's where the BBC's abstract layer comes on top of it. I think that sort of having a common API across TVs is the key to that. I think that maybe the BBC will do some good work there.
Okay. So, Ben, thank you for being here. Thank you for the presentation. Ben Poor, Global Radio.